Hey everyone, and welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Rachel and Dana. Listen, okay, we are here, and that's the part that counts. The struggle to get, the technological issues that plagued our efforts to record this episode have been many and varied, and we've been troubleshooting for almost an hour and 45 minutes before actually hitting record, okay? So we are here now. And that's what we can say. And we have a lot to talk about. We are very, very excited to talk about Dead Until Dark and talk about the plot. We've got romance. We've got crime. It is the perfect blend of a Dana Pittman and Rachel Arsenault novel. Dana, are you okay over there?
What had happened was, listen, whenever a story starts with what had happened was, I don't even know how to spell that, but I know it is very authentic and real to what is going on right now because the shenanigans are off the chain. You know, the morning started with me trying to chill and read and look over my notes. My dog got excited. He dove on the couch. Coffee went flying. Listen. I thought I was having a slow, easy breezy morning. Then I was like, oh, I should review my notes and sip my coffee. So, and then we just had such an amazing pre-show sort of prep and now. But you know what? Here's what I know. I know to be true. The fact that we had to go through all of that brought us to right now and leveling up our podcast and having fun. And we picked an amazing story. Which we've read before, and you all will hear, you heard on the preview. We've read this before, but just reviewing our notes for today's show was just like, oh, I really like this story. So with that said, that's how I'm feeling. My life is feeling like, why me? So I won't say that because I just know that means that this episode is gonna be fire. It's gonna be fire.
It's gonna be the best one yet.
What about
Quality-wise, I think, because we've switched. You guys probably could have guessed we were using Zoom to start with. We've switched platforms to try to get something a little bit smoother and that has less audio delay and all of the weird stuff that comes with, honestly, just a platform that wasn't designed for recording podcasts. So we're trying to level up our game over here. And we're also going to tell you everything it took along the way behind the scenes, because why not?
Listen, and there's no try. There's only to do. We are doing. Right. We're not trying because we done signed up for the account. We did. Okay.
There's no going back now.
It is done. Okay, check. So, but yes. So I think we can get ready to dive in because I think this is going to be listen, I keep saying this is going to be fire. Y'all, you'll know in a little bit. If it's not, just tell us it is. Because that's the kind of day. It's
we
lied to me.
Please.
Listen, lied to me. It's okay. It is okay. I will let you on this one. So, yes, we are ready.
All right. So it's so interesting because in our kind of pre-show chit-chat when we were talking to each other, it's so interesting because, so normally, right, you're looking at the romance side and I'm looking at the crime side, but actually because of our kind of cross-pollination together over the years, as we were each reading, I was noticing a lot of stuff in the romance side, and you were noticing a lot of stuff in the crime side. So I'm really excited to dive into this. So I want to ask you, just to start with, what are some of the key things that you were looking at and that you were noticing and taking notes on for plot specifically for this book?
Well, I want to talk about that, but can we do the summary first and then, or are we diving in?
Yes. No, I forgot the summary because this is just where we're at. I remembered small talk. That was as much as I had.
Listen, Rachel said small talk. Check. Listen.
Moving right along.
Oh my gosh.
Can I listen, dear listener, dear watcher, one of the reasons we needed to switch from Zoom is because we laugh so much on this podcast, but Zoom Rude thinks that when we laugh, it's noise, and it cancels it, right? Because, Zoom has a noise gate to reduce background noise, which is amazing when you're in meetings. However, it also thinks that when we are giggling together, that's just noise, and I do not appreciate that. And also, it made for some really weird silences and some video of us just going, just kind of like shoulder shaking. It was so weird. And if you've seen the video episodes, you have seen this before, I'm sure. So we are trying, but we will get our giggles in. So help us, and you're going to get the giggles too. So let's go into a summary, because that's what's on the agenda. So if you haven't read this book, we always say this, if you've read the book, you're going to get a lot out of it. Even if you haven't read the book, we're going to be talking about plot and about how the story works. So you can still get something out of it. But I do highly recommend reading the pics, because you can engage, I think, that much better. But we're going to get you a summary just to kind of get you up to speed on what this book is about. So in Dead Until Dark, telepathic waitress Sookie Stackhouse is just waiting for anything interesting to happen in small-town Bontemps, Louisiana, especially now that vampires are legally recognized as citizens. Sookie gets exactly what she wants when Bill Compton, a newly public vampire with legal rights to his family's historic home, moves to town. But at the same time, a string of murders begins plaguing their small town, and all of the victims have one thing in common: bite marks. Torn between her love for Bill and the crimes that are happening to girls just like her, Sookie must search for the truth while trying to find love, if she doesn't die first.
You gotta love it. So,
with that in mind, go ahead.
I want to also add just like a small caveat, and I don't know how we'll handle these as we move forward. If you decide to read the story, it is a steamy romance. There are explicit sex scenes on the page, which we'll talk about more, but just so you know that, and there are a lot of bodies dropping, okay, in this story. The great thing, which we probably will talk about here, is like there are some elements that are on the page, but then there are other elements that are not. So it's not gory, but it is present. And so that would just be the minor caveat if you haven't read this story and you decide to, based on hearing this conversation. So some of the things that I was looking for, you sort of hinted at it, was originally I was just thinking, because we've read this story before, I haven't done any sort of deep analysis, and even our treatment of it is it's like we only have one episode to talk about this particular thing. So I thought I was going in just sort of shoring up the romance elements, but then as I was reading, I started taking notice of the crime and the bodies and the interaction and the people, and not just in the sense of how they balance it out as far as characters and moving the plot, but just their positioning and proximity to what is going on when it came to the solving of this investigation, even down to how I think it's, I would say Charlaine. I don't know. Charlaine, okay.
Harris, I think.
Okay, thank you. Because I would be saying all of the syllables, and this probably just don't need all of it. But the point is, how she even just sort of just sprinkled in things. There was so much crumb trails of what was going on that was done both discreetly to hold up the integrity of the crime, but also overtly, so we could understand the type of story that we were involved in. And it was like, okay, I see what you're doing. So it turned into not just me looking at the romance, but looking at the crime itself as it progressed, and how between clues and the bodies dropping, and how that affected the romance, and how it affected the evolution of their relationship, and also how she really played, and I can't wait until we talk about characters, how she really played with the dynamics of Sookie and Bill, which we'll talk about in characters, and how, again, that really played into this story when it came to the plot. The final thing is that I was really a conversation that you and I had a while back offline, but it was online, but it was virtual, but it wasn't recorded, concerning oh goodness, my brain almost lost it. This particular story and whether I wanted to write a cozy. And we're not going to go into all of that here, but one of the things about, as I was interacting with this story, popped up when we had that conversation. And really in this story, realizing how she goes there. Like Sookie goes through some things in this story, and it's not just once, it's not just at the climactic point. And so it just made me really see why people gravitated to this story so much, even if you were not a person who liked a vampire story, or you are not by naturally a reader of we would call this a paranormal romance. And even if you're not, how you could attract so many readers because of the way she told this story. So that was a long way of saying, like, I thoroughly enjoyed this story. You're going to hear that over and over again because we have 4 episodes to talk about the same thing. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. And those were the things that sort of rose to the surface that, of course, directly affect the plot. What about you?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, just reading this story and enjoying it real quick. Does this mean that there's a chance you might still write like a Stevie Cozy mystery? Like, can I compel you to write a crime story?
No. And let me tell you why. I was like, if we find another daggone dead body, listen. There's this song. Oh my gosh. It's this Drake song and it's like, hit the flow. Girl, all the bodies hitting the flow. Every time another body was found, I was like, if they found one more body, I can't take it. So the answer is no. And but now I know why. I can articulate why.
Ooh, that's valuable in and of itself, right?
Yes. So we'll talk more about it. But the point is, I can appreciate the plot and I can appreciate what she did. And it made me enjoy the story, even though I've read it many times. But preparing to talk about it versus just reading it puts you in a different state of mind, just like studying it, right? Because, and this is how we started talking about it originally. You come into it with a different perspective. So yeah, but no, I'm not interested, not even in a little bit.
Perfect. I just thought I'd check because you were appreciating it so thoroughly. I was like, is this the check? Because we had talked about it before and you're like, I don't know. No, thank you. That's not for me. And I was like, did I change your mind? Is it maybe for you? The answer is still no. That's okay.
But I will say, that's why I was like, I may say I still feel adjacent. I still feel like thriller, suspense, definitely my thing. Mystery, but I know why they overlap so much, because you really can attract some of the same or similar people. I don't like the hardcore body dropping. I like it a little bit more in the thriller sense, where there may be bodies that are connected to what needs to be solved. But the in this one,
You know, what's so interesting about this book to me, because you were talking about people who wouldn't ordinarily read a paranormal romance would read this because it's a mystery. And that was exactly how I came to this book. This book was recommended to me as a mystery. And the person who recommended it to me was like, hey, but also just so you know, like, it's also like a romance. So there's like sex on the page. You know, she just kind of gave me the little heads up. But that's how I came to this story, was as a crime editor, you know, just amassing crime stories and reading different ones. And that's what brought me to the story. And it's what kept me in the story when I was young and naive and new to romance and people were having sex on the page and I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, yeah, but there are dead bodies and clues, so I'm going to stick it out, right? And now, look at me now. I read romance and I don't blush as much. But I do turn the audiobook way down when we get to the steamy scenes. But this story really expertly put together our crime and our romance. So I was noticing, so one of the things about the crime, and this is one of the most important things you can know about a crime story. If you are going to sell your audience on a murder mystery or a crime story, playing fair is so important. Making sure that when we get the reveal of the killer on the page, that the reader can look back through the book and see the clues that you breadcrumbed for them, it is vitally important to reader satisfaction. And we also have the rules of sort of reader satisfaction in a romance that we see all the way through the story. And one of the things that I noticed that I think was really important for your plot considerations is the importance of the fact that this book is the first book in a serial, not a series, right? Like this book is three books and then done, but more of a serial style where Charlaine Harris was just kind of going to write books that were Sookie Stackhouse adventures until she was done, right? So what that means for the way that the plot plays out, for the way even I think that the romance plays out, which I think we should talk about, is really, really important because we do not have the sort of, we get a happy for now. What do you call it? Happily ever for now.
Happy for now. No, happy for now.
Yep, happy for now. But whether or not Bill and Sookie are going to make it is up for grabs. And that's important for the style of serial that we're going to be, like that it's going to move forward from here. And then the last thing that I just would like mention as a thing that I would want to talk about is the way that Charlaine Harris immediately sets our expectations for the kind of story this is going to be. Chapter 1, there is violence on the page. There is threat of life and death. And what we get, first of all, our lovers coming into contact, and we learn that Bill is really sexy and he tries to pull some of his like hot vampire moves in the same chapter as he and Sookie both essentially get attacked and almost killed in the process. So we have both of these things happening chapter 1. So the expectation for what we're going to see in this book is clear. No one is going to feel blindsided by pretty much anything that comes after that because chapter 1 lets us know there's life and death and also hot vampire romance.
I agree. Y'all, we're in the discussion. I think one of the things that she does really, really well is that she sets us up from the beginning. Because one of the things that you said just a few minutes ago was like that, making sure that you play fair. But I think that can feel like, okay, play fair. What do you mean? Play fair in a sense of that you really are, when the big reveals come, that you have set up that payoff. But also in this book, there can be a play fair element because this is a true, what I would classify as a romantic mystery. You can classify this as a paranormal romance. You can classify this as a mystery with romance, I guess. So and this is a great example if you're a person that you want to do both and you want to do both equally. And she does a great job of it, including that chapter 1 setup. And so the plot is laid down. So you know the fact that she says it like my vampire. When my vampire, she already lets you know where we're going with this thing. And to the extent that you are going to encounter violence, right? Or the crime element. Because, baby, when they get it in with that fight with the rat trays, if I hadn't read this story before, I'd be like, wait, what? Because in my mind, I'm like, girl, mind your business. How do you say it? Have several seats. No, Sookie wants to jump in, and Sookie is going to get in the middle of it immediately. So therefore, as a reader and as a writer that is looking at executing a story, something similar like this, even if it's not that you want to do a mystery or even like knocking on a cozy mystery, if it wasn't for the sex and the extent of the crimes, And you just want to look at how well she puts those two things together, and how one is never sacrificed for the other, and how both up the stakes for the other. This is your story for that.
Yeah.
She does it well, masterfully. So I totally agree with that. So as you were reading, you mentioned that, you were looking at the romance and we're also looking at the crime. I would love for us to sort of talk about some of the elements when it comes to crime that we see that you feel like the story does well, because we've already sort of established that we get both. We get the plot points and the reader expectations for both genres equally. And I will say that if you are a person that's aiming to do that, she does a great job of ensuring that each of those major beat points are, both elements are represented. And I think that's one of the things that can be hard to do, but you really want to do that. But I would love to talk about some of the elements of crime that she does well, that you like referencing and bringing to the surface in this story. And then we can also talk about some of the same or similar things when it comes to the romance, and then where those two areas bleed, right?
Yeah.
Ooh, bleed. Vampire stuff. I'm sorry.
Pun intended.
Right? Insert sound effects, but we can't do it on Zoom. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So first of all, and this is probably going to show up in the preview episode as well, but because of how well she did this, I want to, for our video, if anybody's watching on YouTube, I want you to see, first of all, I have the sexiest Dead Until Dark cover. Like this is, you can see my Half Price Books sticker. I got this ages ago at Half Price Books, and it is the book I am the most embarrassed to bring to the pool. Like I would read this at the pool and I was like, I don't know what people are gonna think about me when that. Just so for the listener, okay, it's like a pale woman from like the nose down to like the clavicle with very red lips, and you can see one fang, and there's a little bit of blood kind of running down the corner of her mouth, and her tongue sticking out to lick it. It's very sexy looking. But what I also want you to notice, if you're not looking at my distracting cover, I marked the romance versus the crime. So the green tabs are crime and the pink tabs are romance. You can see how, like, the spread that we get just from the visuals of this. And what we get, so we kind of lead with the romance foot, with her meeting Bill. But we get, again, the sort of the life and death stakes immediately when we enter into the story because of her fight with the rat trays, and the rat trays trying to drain Bill for his blood. But within the same chapter, like the next morning, we hear about the first body. So we've already met Bill. We've already seen that there's some sort of action or risk going on. And now Sookie's not involved with the case, but someone Sookie knows from town has been murdered, and she just hears about it. But then when we have, Sookie gets involved by discovering the next body. So she comes into direct contact with the crime because the next body is one of her coworkers. So she kind of officially gets involved into the crime story, and it commences alongside the romance. So when Sookie starts investigating, we have her first, I would say, very intimate encounter with Bill. It's not their first sex scene, but it's like their first makeout scene, right? Which is more intimate than the fact that he kissed her once on the forehead or whatever, right?
Or that she kissed him first. She leaned in to kiss him first. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So, right. So, but what you're seeing is the way that at every moment the romance is moving forward, we get a little bit of the crime, right? And then a little bit of the romance and a little bit of the crime. And they are talking to each other, right? Because the crime is putting conflict, or it's creating conflict in her relationship, right, with Bill. And then Sookie, while the romance is sort of, because what's going to happen is Bill and Sookie are a bit on and off throughout this book, where she'll something will put her off, and then she'll be like, I need to take a break. So what's happening while she's taking a break? She's investigating, right? So we're getting the ongoing intrigue of the crime. And what's happening is she's going to a vampire bar. She's picking up clues. She's hearing about the girls who were murdered, right? And she's trying to piece together this information, which is something that you need for a crime story, is those investigative pieces where your protagonist is going and looking for information and trying to synthesize that information into the truth. So that's a part of playing fair, is having the protagonist getting information and trying to integrate it as they try to draw conclusions, because that information by the end should add up to, so that the reader shouldn't be able to guess the truth, but when they find out the truth, right, they can look back at all of that information, and even some things that you said or did in passing in the book that's going to help them say, oh my gosh, it was there all along and I just didn't see it. And that is the art of the fair play of crime story.
It's important to know that we will aim not to give away the big, like the actual culprit or the killer. But I think a couple things are important in that sort of the discovery of clues and her piecing together. It was important to note that she had, it was almost this, she had a connection to the crime in so many ways that were done beautifully. She had a connection to the crime because of her brother. Her brother had relationships, sexual relationships.
With all of the girls. And then some who didn't get murdered.
Listen, he just was out here throwing that thing, okay?
Jason had game. That's what we learned about Jason. He's hot and he got game.
And ignorance by the boatloads. Okay, so so her brother, and her only brother, and so her brother. Also, the fact that Bill being aiming to blend in, and one time he says go mainstream, right? I think that's the way he said it, to be a part of a normal society, and is aiming to sort of in a way stake his place in the community in which he had original roots to begin with. His family was from that area, which I thought was a great touch to add, being that this environment was sort of this small town framework. So she had that connection, because as her relationship is growing with Bill, then if there are bite marks or there are signs that there was a vampire that was a part of potentially this young lady's life and death and a sexual encounter, then they're looking at him because he's the most prominent and he's new-ish, right, air quote, to town. The other part of this that I thought was a really great tie-in, and it really ties into so much more when we talk about characters, was the fact that to almost everyone involved, the victims were essentially a cookie cutter cut of who Sookie is, right? Like it is a representation, working just an odd job, a regular job, low income, almost invisible, and involved with a vampire in some way. And so therefore, they basically, the victims are her, right? And so what you find is that as this story is being told, she's making it so that there are so many tethers that sort of tie Sookie to this, whether she wants to be a part of it or not. And the fact that she is gifted, and that is used in her, that's for her benefit, and that's also to her detriment on so many occasions, that then she just layered this thing so that not only do you have a clear understanding in book one, but you have a beautiful setup for whatever comes after, whatever that is, because she could have taken it in so many different directions. And so I think it's important when you think about this plot, you could find yourself going down so many different rabbit trails, and all of them were done well. Nothing was left unturned unless it's something that could have easily been carried over to the next book, which we've read the next book. But I think did you finish the series?
I didn't finish this series. I think I've read 3 or 4 of the books.
Yeah, I think you went to 4, and I think I'm on book 3. So I think because we're talking about this podcast from the perspective of writers, that is so important. When you look at the dynamics that she does this plot and how each of those dynamics touch on a very personal spot for Sookie. Every one of those layers touch on something personal that she's got to work out. And Charlaine, look, I want to call her Charlene, and I know it's not L-E-N-E, but Charlaine, not only did she make it so that it plays out well in the plot, but it also plays out well because a lot of those moments, she ensured that Sookie had to work that thing out for herself. It was nobody but her thoughts, and her coming to a place of reconciliation of who she is and what she is and why does she have this gift and how can she use it and still remain optimistic and still remain herself and a vital part of this community that she loves. So it's just so layered. It's so layered. When you are looking at it from a standpoint of the crime story, do you see the layering the same as being subplots, or all those just all extensions of the crumbs that are necessary to solving the crime?
Yeah, I think of those things as layers to the crime. So they're like, rather than subplots, they're just like you said, they're clues and they're contributions to the crime. But basically, because of the way that she curated what those things are, it meant that they added layers to the story rather than just being informational clues, right? So like, rather than it's just like, this girl. So let's just imagine Sookie is someone different altogether. She's educated and wealthy, and she is from outside of Bontemps even, right? And she comes to this case, and it's uneducated girls who are working these sort of like customer service type jobs in relationships with vampires. Well, we can still have a perfectly good crime story of her sussing out the clues and, investigating and finding the truth. However, we get something better because we have Sookie, who's like the girls. The clues she's picking up affect her directly because this is her small town. And I think something that's really interesting, this was a note that I had for characters, but I'm gonna spoil it here. One of the things that you'll notice about this book is when we look at the suspect pool, we don't have a clear list of suspects exactly. Like, if you think about a classic like Agatha Christie, or even a crime story where the investigator comes from outside of the situation to investigate a crime, we have a fairly clear pool of like, okay, these, say 5 people are our primary suspects. In this story, we have some people who are like the police's prime suspects. So we've got Bill and Jason, but we don't actually have a clear pool of who we think could possibly have done it. And that's really important because this is Sookie's small town. She knows all these people. There is no one obvious who could have done it because these are people she's known forever, right? So what happens is, as she's gathering the clues are just adding meaning to Sookie's involvement in the case while still providing us those clues. So I don't think of those as subplots, but I think of them as very well curated, well placed, and well timed clues to really elevate the story to be about more than just the murder investigation, but to actually make it personal to Sookie and allow the story to explore, the way that girls like Sookie are perceived, right? And the way that, right, so for Sookie, and this is something that she says in the story, is like, I get that I'm not educated and I might be a little naive, but I like my job as a waitress. I like what I do, and I like the role that I get to play in my community. And you have no right to look down on me for that, right? And it gives her the opportunity to confront that kind of, I don't know if prejudice is the right word, but to confront the way that people view her, right, in the story, and represent herself and kind of also get more confidence in her place in the world. So, you know what I mean? So it's like, when we talk about things in a story doing double duty, that's how I think about those things rather than as subplots for the crime. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think as a part of that, it's sort of like this, it's almost indistinguishable between her internal and her external conflict, right? Because, which hopefully we'll talk about more in characters, but because for her, one of the things that you notice even with the plot is like, she's an outsider even as being an insider, right? And the same is true for Bill. So as all of this is unfolding, the very thing that makes her an outsider becomes a very vital part of what helps to begin to solve this crime. And what you begin to do is you begin to see her grow in this air quote amateur detective, right? Amateur sleuth sort of moment, even to the point where it was like, oh, a detective, right? And even what Bill ends up doing towards the end, like the detective, I was like, oh my gosh, that was so on the nose, right? And I don't know how I missed it before. But as we go through like as she is progressing through this, she's having to, the more that clues are being revealed, the more that bodies are dropping and its proximity to her, it's requiring her to dig down and sort of find the parts of her that she's buried because she's different, and to confront the things that she's intentionally tried to stuff down to appear regular and to appear normal. And the fact that her and Bill sort of have the same issue, right? That everybody knows Sookie, they call her crazy Sookie. Oh, Sookie crazy, right? Mm-hmm. And she's doing everything in her power to not look crazy, right? To not let off that she knows something, to put up the mental wall so she doesn't hear their thoughts. And Bill is doing everything that he can to be neighborly, going to the meetings, telling his experiences that he can contribute because he knows, one, that it'll make Sookie happy, but that it is also being a vital part of the community. And even at one point, it said, oh, well, people wouldn't think he'd do that based on what he did at the community meeting, the Leaders of the Dead, whatever it was called, their little historical group. And so both of them having this same struggle with aiming to be normal. And it's in fact the thing that makes them abnormal is what they truly contribute to the situation. I would love to know from your perspective, because I think it does add to the romance, but sort of that interchange between them in a sense of Bill, giving her some of his blood, and the fact that I feel like that's almost this. What I wrote down in my notes was like the development of her gift and the awareness of her gift, but how that interchange went, because we see it at the beginning, so we know that there's some aspect of it. I think we sort of get a hint of it through her ability to hear thoughts, but then we really get it after the rat trays, right? But how you sort of categorize, I guess, when you're looking at this story and analyzing it and looking at it through the perspective of how a client can use it to tell either a crime, or I think a fantasy, or if we don't want to say fantasy, of what do you want to portray as far as the extent of that suspension of belief is. because I think on the romance side, you think of it, it can be just like, whether it's arousal or erotic elements, even a kink maybe, but it is vital here because even to the point of when we get to that climactic moment, because Bill was aware that her ingesting, oh God, that's not
Are you gonna be able to? Are you gonna? Dude, boy, that one really hung you up. You're like, huh? do you want me to take over? Do you want me to just dive in?
Tag your head.
I watched the brain start to go. I know what
You know what I mean. You know where I'm going.
Okay, yeah, here, let me fill in. I got you. Okay, so, but I think that, I don't know if this is going to answer your actual question, but I think this is something super, super important for setups and payoffs. So one of the things that we learn is that vampire blood is lucrative to humans because if you ingest it, right, if you drink a vampire's blood, it will it makes you healthier, it fends off disease, your libido gets, I don't know, jazzed. I'm regretting my choice of words so hard right now. And the fact that I said that right as you took a sip of coffee. This is where all of the hours previous to this podcast are starting to set in a real weird way. So anyway, the point so this is a plot point, right, of what vampire blood can do for humans and why it also puts someone like Bill at risk, right? So why there's this, so it adds to the sense of the tenuous relationship between humans and vampires. But here's what I think is so vital about that setup. We get that setup in chapter 1. The rat trays attack Bill to get his blood in chapter 1. And so, because what could have happened in an alternate universe where Charlaine Harris, did make different choices, I think it's in chapter 2, Sookie gets attacked by the rat trays for revenge. She is nearly killed in that altercation, but Bill, because he was supposed to meet her, he shows up and sees that she's dying. He gives her some of his blood to save her. I think the mistake would have been to introduce the fact that vampire blood can heal a person in that chapter, right in the moment. Could you technically have done it? Yeah, maybe, but it would have felt a little bit more ham-handed of like, well, that's convenient. Bill shows up and he's like, wait, my blood will save you. And you're sort of like, okay. Versus chapter 1, he's attacked because of the value of his blood. So he has the opportunity to, when Sookie saves him, he's like, hey, look, they've already drained this blood. Do you want it? It's a way that I can pay you back. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So it fits effortlessly into the story and it sets up a detail of the world that's going to come up throughout this story and throughout the series itself. So having that in chapter 1, because Sookie doesn't need the blood in that moment, we sort of just accept it because we're already like, okay, vampires are real and they're out in public and legally recognized. So we're like, sure, their blood can do all kinds of stuff. Why not? We're just taking that in as contextual information rather than it feeling like a super convenient plot device that the author used to get around a difficult situation and make it feel like a cheat in the story. And so the way that I think about that is as a setup that's going to contribute to the rest of the story. And again, it's going to contribute to the rest of the series. It's going to keep coming up. And so I forgot what your original question was, but I think that setup and payoff was so important. So I went off on that rabbit trail instead.
No, that helps because, girl, I was about to be, ooh, okay. So when we see it in chapter 1, he says, here, you can have it, right? This is worth a lot of money, or here are the medical benefits that have been proven or whatever. But this is also one of those great moments of like that rule of 3, right? You see it chapter 1 And not only when we see it in chapter 1, do we understand the dynamic between the humans and the vampires, the whole like crux of blood and how it plays here, because that's the thing that makes vampires scary, right? They suck blood, but in this case, it's done sexually. It's people seek them out where they are to do it, and
because they're just so jazzed, you know?
Right. And so we see it here in chapter 1. Then we see it when Sookie is attacked. Then we see it when Bill makes the very, when Bill is thinking ahead. I know it's a better word. Bill is thinking ahead and he's like, look, this will make you stronger. This will make you more aware. It will help, of course, and we also saw before how it will help heal her. But how you sort of, because you laid that groundwork in the beginning, it has a huge payoff, even to the point of the last chapter, when he's like, let me, and she's like, no, this has got to work itself out. And we see both the positives and the negatives, not just of, in this case, how his blood is used, but also in the dynamics of their relationship. Like, we got to draw some lines here. We've got to place some boundaries here, because we are walking into uncharted territory. So you did. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about or that I want to make sure we sort of book in, is the fact of, again, going back to the first chapter, that we get an understanding of what not just the core emotion that this book is sort of circling around, but we also get the extents in which the characters will go. Sookie shows right up front, whether it is out of ignorance, bravery, courage, or the fact that she's not going to let nobody go down on her watch, the extent that she will go to, and that resolve in her is tested over and over again, and it also puts her in very precarious situations, which is true of this type of story. And so I really feel like the setup of knowing that there are life and death stakes, there is love here. There's love between a human and a vampire, or the potential of it. There are life and death stakes. And there is a different sort of cultural, a different sort of reality at play, even though it's set in a contemporary context. And so we see that from the onset, and it's sort of unpacked and expanded, of course, as we move into the story. And so I think that is another part that that we get really well and set up out through the story. Were there anything else that you wanted to add to that when it came to the crime?
No, I actually was going to say, like, before we wrap up, I want to make sure that we talk some about the romance and the pacing. And the thing I want to just like start by saying is that if you are, I think this is true for any, like, even if you're going to do a romantic subplot for a story, if you want it, and this is a fully dual, this is, for my clients who write mystery romance, this is a book I send them to help them calibrate. Are you writing a crime story with a love story subplot? Are you writing a mystery romance? Like, let's position this thing and make sure that we're very clear about what we're writing, so we know what audience we're trying to bring it to. This book is a perfect combination of mystery and romance. But I say this even when you're doing a romantic subplot. Your romantic subplot should be relevant to the story in some way, right? So the main plot of the story should be affecting your romantic subplot, and vice versa. Your romantic subplot should be, adding stakes to or complicating the external story, or your main story plot. And we see that with this book so well, right? Because again, the crime and the investigation it is both bringing Sookie and Bill together and driving wedges between them as well, because it's bringing Sookie into contact with the other side of vampires, right? Where she has to understand not all vampires are like Bill. This is affecting the case and, her understanding of her own investigation, as well as what's complicating her relationship with Bill, right? And so it's bringing them together, right? It's Bill who takes her to the vampire bar. And it's also her experience at the vampire bar that makes her like, Bill, I need a break from you. I know that makeout was real good, but I've had my fill of vampires right now, right? So it's moving and it's complicating their relationship, because it's also bringing out the prejudices, right, for vampire human relationships, and it's complicating Sookie's like just regular life, right? When her coworkers start looking sideways at her because she's in a relationship with a vampire. So that's always what you want with a romantic subplot, whether you're trying to go mystery romance, like this goes like double, triple if you're going for a mystery romance. But even for a romantic subplot, that main plot is affecting and complicating and escalating the stakes for the romance. So tell me, let's talk a little bit about the romance generally and the pacing. And
I want to talk about that, but I want to point to, I don't want to miss something in what you just said. And it also complicates and increases the stakes for them individually within their communities, right? It really disrupts and complicates things for Bill within the vampire hierarchy and community, and how things are done and how he stands and how he wants to go mainstream. And it does the same thing for Sookie, because Sookie is aiming to be normal. You already are abnormal because we know you can hear our thoughts. And now you are kicking it with a vampire, right? And so you just have all kinds of ways. So for someone that is fighting so hard and doing everything in her power to remain invisible and to just be seen as Sookie, the really nice waiter at the bar at Merlot's, then she sort of like that boat has passed you by, sis. You just might as well go ahead and let it go. But I think it's a wonderful play of how doing something that makes her feel so happy can cause so much strife, and how she has to wrestle with that in her own person of what she's going to do about that. So I want to say that. When it comes to the romance, I think this is a great display of the combination of, like we said, of the dual genre. But I also love that after we talked about romances being formulaic and our last pick, and we have the formulaic presence of the romance, but we also have a disruption of it, right? So we have the formulaic of, like, we have the meet cute, girl meets vampire, and oh, boy meets girl, right? And how there's immediate chemistry and attraction, and even to the point where she sees his essence literally, right?
Yeah.
She sees that he's a vampire, and he doesn't even know that she can see that quality about him, because it's something that people normally cannot see, but she can see even in a dark place. So she sees his essence, and he knows that she's different because he keeps asking her, "What are you?
What are you?" Yeah.
What are you? So both of them see the essence of each other, and now it becomes, what do we do with it? And while they're trying to figure out what we do with it, the world and everyone viewing this relationship has an opinion. And not only do they have an opinion, they are not shy about communicating that on Bill's side or on Sookie's side. And so we see this love that comes on sort of quick in the most inopportune time, but it becomes really rooted in who they are and showing who they are and the extents that they will go to. It really is very important. I will also say that the way that I feel like it was a disruption is because usually you will have something like the proof of love scene much later in a story. Bill's proof of love, or his grand gesture towards Sookie, happens in chapter 2 or 3. I'm not as grounded in the chapters because I don't have my physical book around, but I think it happens like the 2nd or 3rd chapter when he seeks, what I say, revenge, when he goes after the rat trays and when he goes after the person that hurt her later. So he continues to show up and show Sookie that I'm in this. Even if you are unsure, I get why you're unsure, but I'm 10 toes down and floating. He's floating in this. Okay, my jokes are corny, but it doesn't matter. It happens in the book. And so it shows how you can have something that is formulaic, but you do it in a new and insightful way. Even in the treatment of the vampires, which we probably should totally talk about in a separate sort of conversation. But we're seeing that here. It's a love story, but the treatment of the love story is different because he is a vampire. All the way to the thing of how do you have what we would call fun and games or getting to know you when he spends half of his day, in his
in the dirt.
Coffee, in the dirt. And so how do you then build this relationship even to the point of her having this sort of her having this gifted ability to read people's thoughts, but she can't read his, and it becomes a sense of comfort for her and a sense of peace for her, but it's also a challenge because now you've got to learn how to interact and engage and get to know based upon words and communication and time. And so we see those elements of the romance very clearly. I really think she did a great job. And this is probably where in my notes, I feel like the audiobook did this story the biggest disservice because I did not care for her voices for Bill. And I think her depiction of him made him feel a lot weaker than when you read the story. Mm-hmm. He feels like a cinnamon roll when he keeps saying, listen, y'all, that's a trope. He feels like a cinnamon roll, like a vampire that's a cinnamon roll. He feels like a cinnamon roll according to the way she narrated him. But when you read the book, he keeps telling her, pump your brakes. Like, don't forget, like, I'm only like that with you. I'm not like that with everybody. My natural inclination isn't for protection. It's for survival. So him communicating that, it always puts Sookie in a place of not just the danger of her heart and her emotions, but her life is on the line the whole time. And so I think that's the greatest demonstration of the merger of these two, is the fact that this love is deadly, point blank, period.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And we get these constant, like, she is being constantly reminded, which is why it pairs so well with a crime story, because crime stories also have life and death stakes in them, right? So she is constantly encountering why it's dangerous to be in with a vampire, right? The first time that she goes to Bill's house and those other vampires are around, and she's like, oh, some of y'all are gross. And then she doesn't know how to think about Bill. And just to your point, I'm never going to get over the fact that a beta male is called a cinnamon roll. And now, honestly, I want to eat a physical
like
baked good
pastries.
Cinnamon rolls. I love a pastry. But to the point where even, right, Bill has to warn her, right? So when they're making out and she like bites his neck or something, right? Whatever. And he says, you can't do that because I am still, like, I am in some ways an instinctual animal, and I will react to you. If you do it again, you're going to be in trouble, right? And so even being in a relationship with Bill, and when she finds him and he's angry and she's like, he might kill me right now. Like, he is he's got that anger and that fire, like, it's kicked in, vampire brain is kicking in right now, and I am not safe, right? So even her relationship with Bill, like, Bill is a danger to her at times. And so I think you're right. I think we definitely, we do get, I don't know how they narrated Bill, but it sounds like they did poor old Bill dirty in the narration, because he really is, he is a dangerous creature, and he is he's trying to mainstream, but it doesn't make him not a vampire. And I think that that's something that I feel like made this a good paranormal romance. And I say that as someone who's not super into paranormal romance, like just, vampires and shifters for vampires and shifters' sake, is not my particular thing. But I think that Charlaine Harris layered in meaning to the supernatural element, right? So again, because Sookie doesn't fit in and she's trying to, and Bill doesn't fit in because of his supernatural abilities and he's trying to, and the way that it brings them together and it pulls them apart, it brings them together and it pulls them apart, it adds a layer, I think, of interest beyond just this is interesting because he's a vampire, and added that little bit of additional emotional depth to the choice to make it a paranormal romance. Yes.
This is when I wish we would have done an additional episode on world building and themes, because so I'm just going to have to tack it on plot, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. The other part about this story, in a sense of romance, is baby, this could be considered a love triangle like no other.
Oh man,
and done
a love
well.
Quadrangle.
You know what? We listen. Could you?
I've got notes on that in characters. Listen,
okay, come on, we'll talk about it.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Carry on.
So in the scope of the way that I want to talk about it now is that this is again another great setup, because she made it so that she could have taken this anywhere. The fact that we know that we have shifters, the fact that we know that we have vampires, the fact that we are now, like, Sookie thinks, oh, I am weird and I am odd. But now your odd is actually not so odd, because there's more things that are out there. This is the element that we have chosen to recognize as a society. But there are other elements that are out there that we haven't. And at one point she jokes, like, what are you talking about? Like the Loch Ness Monster or whatever she did, which she sort of made a joke about it. And it's like, maybe. And so I think through the relationships, whether it was the romantic relationships, whether it was the familial relationships with Jason, with Gran, whether it was the relationships with her community, whether through the Andy Bellefleur. Listen, I'm gonna mess up the French names. Okay. Andy Bellefleur. No, I ain't gonna mess it up. And her boss and her work situation, her relationship with her closest friend, if you want to call it a best friend. And so we see all of those dynamics, and all of those dynamics are both her decision to fall in love with a vampire brings all of that into it. It sort of yanks all of that into that life or death stakes of the story. So one of the things that, and I don't have a clear way to communicate this, and if you do, because you're really good with words like that, I'd love to sort of get a really good understanding of this. I sort of feel like the place where the merging of them, it takes the crime and the mystery element takes it up, is because it goes from being about love and hate to life or death at all times. So if you were to pick the true central, to me, it wouldn't be love. If you had to pick one, it would not be love because of that. Because if life or death stakes are happening at all times, that is the thing that drives everything. Because if she's dead, well, in this case, if she's dead, she could still be alive. Maybe that's, it's like the chicken or the egg. I don't know. But if you were to look at it in consideration of the story as a whole, it's the fact that that sort of life or death stakes overshadows everything. Yeah, you need love, but if you are dead, you know what I mean? Like, but in this case, again, it's a gray area. And so this is one of those stories that helps you to formulate how you see it as a writer, and how your world that you are creating depicts it on the page. And I think the more clear you are, the better you can write it, and the better your readers can decide if this is the kind of story for me.
Yeah. Well, and I think something I want to say again, this goes back to the fact that we're in a serial style series. And I think that's why the introduction of life and death stakes is really important, because not every story in the series is going to be a crime story. a lot of them, they'll sort of have a mystery, but it won't be like a crime. And so introducing the life and death stakes sets the tone for the series so that what you know is that we're kind of in an adventure series. We're in like a sexy adventure series is almost how I would describe it, because we're gonna have like that love triangle that gets introduced. It's introducing us to the fact that this thing is far from over, and Bill has some competition out there, and boy does he have competition. And he has not just competition, but compelling competition, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not like, a love triangle where it's obvious who she belongs with. We are getting all kinds of different kind of players onto the field, that knowing that there's going to be more books, and we get that, right? The ending tells us, again, this thing is not over. And so I think that having that kind of overarching sense of life and death stakes leaves it open so that the future books aren't locked into being crime stories, but they're always going to fall into life and death is on the table, because that's the nature of this world, right? She's getting sucked into the supernatural world, and the supernatural world is dangerous. She's hoping to find love along the way, but that's going to be complicated by the fact that she might die at some point, right? And so I think that that's where those stakes become essential to that serial, and setting up so that Charlaine Harris has a lot of freedom within the series to kind of do lots of different stuff, as long as she's kind of staying inside that arena of life and death and those high action stakes.
And essentially what she's saying in English is that the promise that she made to reader in book 1 holds true all the way through to the end. And yep. You are absolutely correct. Like, essentially, even as you were saying that, it's like that life or death becomes this umbrella. And I think what this also says, which, is so yummy to me, is this is where you can help yourself if you're a person and you like to dibble dabble in this and dibble dabble in that. It's like set up your umbrella. Make that umbrella nice and secure, so that they know what they're going to get, but you can do all these things underneath the guise of that umbrella. And also with that, I would say, don't check out of this story because it is a vampire story, because you will really miss out on a great opportunity to see the dance of how this story unfolds. So whether you decide you want to do it with humans, or you want to do it where it's a difference between a civilian and an FBI, or if you want to do it in the context of military, or you want to do it in the context of a small town, or there are so many different opportunities where this layup can be a slam dunk. And so it just so happens that she utilized the supernatural world as her context, right? Of like people being, okay, we're okay with this kind of crazy. Well, then that means you're going to go ahead and open the door to all the other kind of things. And I think it's done really, really well, because it's all wrapped around this question of, I like to say this, where, laws don't change hearts, right? And in this case, it's like the law of accepting the existence of vampires because some sort of medical things have been put in place to protect humans did not change how people saw them. Yes, you had the legal right, but that did not change the dynamics between vampires and humans, nor did it change the dynamics between humans and vampires. Like, it goes flip-flop, right? Yeah, it's not ways. Just humans. Exactly. So, look, I'm like, flip-flop. It's flip-flopping. And so I think this is a great story for that. And that's why you can find yourself reading it again and again and again. And this really would be a masterclass of not just crime, not just love, not just bringing them together and telling that story, but also in all the other elements that we've talked about and will continue to talk about throughout this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, this is another one of those books that I have all my crime clients read, because it's a great example of having your killer on the page and having where the reader has no idea that they're there, and fully delivering on the satisfaction of the reveal of who that killer is, and realizing that the clues were right under your nose the whole time. And this is the brilliance of this story. Sookie has specific investigative moments. However, we are getting clues about the crime even when Sookie isn't meaning to investigate, when she's not doing it on purpose. And that is a huge aspect of hiding your killer in plain sight. And this is a great read for going through, reading it, experiencing it, and then going and being able to backtrack to see how she did it, because she does it, and she does it very, very well. So with that in mind, we're kind of coming to the top of the hour, or whatever we're getting to time. Are there any other sort of takeaways or questions you would suggest a writer take away when it comes to plot and this story, or a story like this?
Great question. I would just say in general, would be the type of story where come into it with an open mind. If you love this sort of story, and you love paranormal romance, because we know the evolution even of that term is fairly recent. But if you love that sort of story, then you're going to love it. You're going to love it. But don't close the door if that's not your thing. If you're not looking for vampires that got a little sparkle to them, you're just going to have to overlook that, because the other things just like totally outweigh that. I think another thing is this is a great story for the hiding your killer in plain sight. And man, does she do this. And man, this chapter one, you could just spend forever just on chapter one. Chapter one. And that when it comes to the love story, I think this is a great example of having a story that really is driven by a singular protagonist, but the growth and evolution of both the protagonist and the love interest is vital to the telling of the story. It is vital that we look at how Bill is transforming, even though the story is never told from his point of view. And that is a specific choice that you make. And that's where this really does almost, matches pace with like a cozy, right? Because of that, like it's just from her point of view. So it is a great love story in that. And lastly, I would say this is a great depiction of how you may want to think through and treat special abilities. Whether it is, in this case, her, that would be considered telepathic, or the fact that you can use that same sort of consideration for magic. You can consider that same sort of thing for someone just having a special skill set, of how it is both a gift and a curse, right? It's a pro and a con. And we see Sookie wrestling with that. And the final thing that I will say, because I don't want to take all of them, is looking at the things that Charlaine chose to put on the page versus off. Man. And it's really important because this is a crime story that has a lot of victims. And I think how you choose to do that, and when you choose to have it on page, and the fact that our protagonist is a victim multiple times. She is in the crosshairs of danger many times. And so deciding when those things are on page and off, and the pacing of that, so that it doesn't overshadow the love story. Chef's kiss.
Yeah.
And what
take
about
out
you?
your pen and paper and start taking your notes. You said you didn't want to take all of them, but I think you did, because I had all the same points. Which is great, because we're getting to time anyway, and I gotta land this plane, man. But I do want to say, I basically want to just reiterate where I had kind of similar takeaway points. Read this for hiding your killer in plain sight. Read this for planting those clues, even when your protagonist isn't actively investigating or meaning to. Setups and payoffs. Absolutely. I'm thinking about, this is huge for, just like you said, whether it's a crime story protagonist who has a special skill set, or you're working with a magic system, setting it up so that it never feels like a cheat, but it feels like an integrated part of how the world works. And the way that I say it, you said it, the abilities have pros and cons. I always say you want that magic or that ability to provide obstacles and opportunities. We want to see both of those things at work, because that's how you can take something even as sort of as dramatic an opportunity as vampire blood and turn it into something that is an integrated part of the context that actually feels real, that contributes to the story and the suspension of disbelief, and doesn't just feel like something the author is going to pull on when they need an easy way out. Because it's really easy for very powerful creatures or abilities to leave that impression with the reader where it just kind of feels like the cheat that you can always rely on. So having those cons or those limitations and those obstacles to powerful forces in the world is vital to the suspension of disbelief and to making your story just interesting, because now you're looking at how the protagonist is navigating both the limitations and the opportunities of whatever that ability or feature is. And that's more interesting to the reader than how cool the feature is. It always will be more interesting to the reader. And I talk at length about this when I talk about soft magic systems. So I'm sure it's going to come up at some other juncture, but those are some really key. Oh, and the last one would be, if you're thinking about a serial style, like novel series, this is a huge resource in doing book one for a serial and setting up that, just like you said, that umbrella, and how you can kind of create a serial style that closes, right, that wraps up book one, that fills your romance requirements, that fills your crime requirements, introduces life and death, and sets you up for however many books you want to, kind of have the adventures and misadventures take place within.
I want to add one more, because I know you're about to close us out, but I did not want to forget this. I think the fact that the blood element could have been a kink, because that is how the victims even saw it, but that there was a substantial reason to have consideration for it. So the fact that the medical things, the fact that how the humans saw it, the way that vampires saw it. So it took something that could have been relegated straight to a kink to being something that was a vital part of a lot of how this story played out, right? And especially when it came to the victims. And it was a lot at almost like objectifying how the human vampire experience is in the story. And so I think that's another part that I don't want to miss. And before you close, I will say, which I probably should have said at the top, this story is dated. So how they treat people of color and how they treat LGBTQ, and I think I may be missing one more letter, people is like, I don't know if it's as culturally sensitive as you probably would see now. So just be aware of that. But I think it still is a great story for all the different reasons that we've talked about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's definitely an important thing just to note of, like, I think this was published in maybe 2005. And so the understanding of sensitivity, the execution of sensitivity is just, it's 20 years old, 20, and it reads like it, so just, be advised, be aware. And if you can sort of take that with a grain of salt as best as you can, there's a lot that you can pull from this book. Now, I will say one thing that's interesting about it is that she attempts that sensitivity. Like, she actually attempts to do that, that representation well for the time that she's trying it, right?
I think the word choices that you say here is important. I don't think it's the sensitivity. I think she went for the diversity. She did that wonderfully, because she has where there's it's multicultural cast that have a part in it, and that's a regular part of it, and she's very aware of including them and having the diversity in both, whether it is ethnicity and also gender identity. but it would still have whether the sensitivity context of how the choices of words and how they are identified, it is dated. Yeah,
no, that's a great point. Thank you for that clarification. I wouldn't call it sensitive, but the effort toward diversity is happening.
Yes.
And it's a 2005 effort, and we can feel it. We can, you know.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. I think that's an important mention. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it here. We're already over time, so we'll go ahead and call it a day. But thank you guys so much for joining us, for hanging with us through the giggles and the struggles. And we will be back at it next week to talk about the characters in this novel. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a comment, and join us next week for our discussion on characters. But until then, happy writing.